Well, as we've been going through the book of Daniel, we possibly have grown to love King Nebuchadnezzar for various reasons, perhaps, okay? Maybe he kind of reminds us of ourselves a little bit, right? He has his moments of failure, but he seems to have his moments of glory, I guess, if you want to put it that way. I think we like him because he's a bad guy who finds redemption. He kind of reminds me, at least me personally, right? Kind of giving away my hand of where I grew up. He kind of reminds me of Darth Vader in Star Wars, right? If you just see the original Star Wars, he's the bad guy, right? But he finds redemption. You can fill in the gap with the other Star Wars movies. He seems to be a good kid who went wrong, became completely evil, but finds redemption. Another modern movie, Maleficent, right? They kind of redid that one, but she becomes this character who was good, but she was wronged, and through her wrong, she took her bitterness and pain and became something evil. And then she finds redemption, right? At least, in the new version. So we liked stories like that, and in one sense, Nebuchadnezzar can kind of cling to us a bit because he is that guy, right? He's the guy who's just completely, destroyed the city of Jerusalem, destroyed the temple, but by the end of chapter 4, he finds a redemption from God. Now, chapter 5 is going to introduce us to another character who lives in the towering shadow of Nebuchadnezzar, one of his descendants by the name of Belshazzar. Unlike Nebuchadnezzar, who clearly left his mark in the world, building up Babylon to the greatness that it was and receiving the acclamation and the power and the greatness that no other kingdom in the world has lived up to, Belshazzar really hasn't done much to improve Babylon, to improve its condition. And in fact, as we'll see, Babylon is, the empire itself is actually on the way out. Belshazzar, he's not even really a true king. He's a vice-regent. His father, Nabonidus, is the king, but his father is having some sort of religious experiences, and he decides to worship some gods, basically other than the Babylonian gods, and so his father has decided, I'm going to go away and serve, I believe it was a moon god, but he's gone away to this temple to go and basically pursue his religious studies, I guess, if you want to put it that way, and he's left his son, Belshazzar, in charge of the kingdom, but not as king, kind of just as second in command. Belshazzar, he struggles to find his place in the world and how he is going to be remembered. And so in an attempt to make his mark on the world, he throws a party. However, in the course of the party, there's going to be a few uninvited guests that show up that lead to the end of the party and his quest for significance through the party. So let's read. Let's kind of jump in. We're only going to read chapter 5, verses 1 through 17, and we'll read the rest as we go through the rest of the sermon. But let's read 1 through 17 just to get started here. Okay. It says, King Belshazzar gave a great banquet for 1,000 of his nobles, and drank wine with them. While Belshazzar was drinking his wine, he gave orders to bring in the gold and the silver goblets that Nebuchadnezzar, his father, had taken from the temple in Jerusalem, so that the king and his nobles, his wives, and his concubines might drink from them. So they brought in the gold goblets that had been taken from the temple of God in Jerusalem, and the king and his nobles, his wives, and his concubines drank from them. As they drank the wine, they praised the gods of gold and silver, of bronze, iron, wood, and stone. And suddenly, the fingers of a human hand appeared and wrote on the plaster of the wall, near the lampstand in the royal palace. The king watched the hand as it wrote. His face turned pale, and he was so frightened that his legs became weak and his knees were knocking. The king summoned the enchanters, astrologers, and diviners, and then he said to these wise men of Babylon, Whoever reads this writing on the wall and tells me what it means will be clothed in purple and have a gold chain placed around his neck, and he will be made the third highest ruler in the kingdom. Then all the king's wise men came in, but they could not read the writing or tell the king what it meant. So King Belshazzar became even more terrified, and his face grew more pale, and his nobles were baffled. The queen, hearing the voices of the king and his nobles, came in to the banquet hall. May the king live forever, she said. Don't be alarmed. Don't look so pale. There is a man in your kingdom who has the spirit of the holy gods in him. In the time of your father, he was found to have insight and intelligence and wisdom like that of the gods. Your father, King Nebuchadnezzar, appointed him chief of the magicians, enchanters, and astrologers and diviners. He did this because Daniel, whom the king called Belteshazzar, was found to have a keen mind and knowledge and understanding, and also the ability to interpret dreams, explain riddles, and solve difficult problems. Call for Daniel, and he will tell you what the writing means. So Daniel was brought before the king, and the king said to him, Are you Daniel, one of the exiles my father, the king, brought from Judah? I have heard that the spirit of the gods is in you, and that you have insight, intelligence, and outstanding wisdom. The wise men and enchanters were brought before me to read this writing and tell me what it means, but they could not explain it. Now I have heard that you are able to give interpretations and to solve difficult problems. If you can read the writing and tell me what it means, you will be clothed in purple, and have a gold chain placed around your neck, and you will be made the third highest ruler in the kingdom. Well, there is the account at the beginning. So as we go through this, you see in your outline, we're going to look at verses 1 through 4 and kind of look at the party itself. Okay, what's the deal with this party? Why is this party so important? Okay, then we'll look at the uninvited guests. There's 2 of them. And finally, we'll see what the Bible says about the true and better party. So let's get started with the party, all right? Really and truly, to understand the narrative, to understand what's going on here, you have to understand the reason for the party in the first place. Okay, the year is 539 BC. It's October the 12th. We know this with exact certainty. Okay, the world is changing rather fast. Just a week before this, before this very night, the Babylonian army had suffered a defeat in the city of Opis, which was about 50 miles north along the Euphrates from Babylon. Okay, they had suffered a defeat. The Medo-Persian Empire is coming. The city of Sippar surrendered without a battle just a day or so away from Babylon. So the army's moving. They were 50 miles away a week ago. Just one day before tonight's events here, the city of Sippar just said, "We're done. Take us." They didn't even offer a fight. So quite literally, on this night, the enemy is at the gates of Babylon. Okay, death is at the door. On this occasion, we read, it says that King Belshazzar made a great feast for 1,000 of his lords, and he drank wine in front of thousands. So this party, right, it's clearly one of excess. Okay, there is what would be known today as an open bar. Okay, there's wine for everybody. The king has apparently taken the lead in drinking in front of everyone there. His guest list is not shabby either. Okay, he's got the lords of the city, of the empire, his wives, and even his concubines all together. So, I mean, it's quite the scene. And usually, it's interesting because a lot of the etiquette at this time, usually the queen didn't make herself publicly, known. She couldn't just come out in front of everybody. That was one of the things that happened in the Persian Empire too with Esther, right? She couldn't, the queen before her, Queen Vashti, she was not to be brought before the rest of the men in front of the kings. The king actually messed up there. But anyway, that was part of the etiquette back then. But Belshazzar, he's kind of just breaking all the rules here. This party, he's going all out. So it's quite the scene. And the story plunges us into Club Babylon, as it were. Okay, they didn't have strobe lights. They had torches. All right. Apparently, this room, actually, where they were probably partying in, has actually been really discovered. I believe the dimensions of it, it's a 175 by 50-foot room, if I remember the dimensions correctly. It's somewhere close to that. But this room has actually been discovered by archaeologists. Okay, this scene, it's a scene of ostentation, decadence, carousing, coarseness, wantonness, and self-indulgence. Here's a word that we can use to describe it. I had never really heard of it, but this one came up. Bacchanalian. Okay, Bacchanalian, which means a party of riotous drunkenness and merrymaking. So if anything, we all got a new vocabulary word today, right? Bacchanalian. All right, you can look that one up later. Bacchanalian. Okay, big word. Anyway, so Belshazzar, he's about to do some very dumb things in a moment. Okay, but again, let's inquire first about this party and why he's throwing it. Okay, some scholars believe that the party is a scheduled religious feast. Okay, so in a sense, he's supposed to be throwing this party because he's supposed to be toasting his gods. This is something scheduled. It just so happens that the Persians are at the are at the gates, right? But he's gonna throw his party anyway. Okay, others believe that this is a party that is being thrown basically to raise the morale of the city. I mean, everybody knows Persia's coming. Everybody knows. The whole town knows. Okay? And so it's like, well, what do you do? Should we just let panic reign? And so some scholars think this is Belshazzar's idea. Like, you know what? Let's not get everybody's hopes down. Let's try to keep everybody's spirits up. We don't know. Maybe we'll beat them, right? We have our walls. They're impenetrable, and they literally were. Okay, so it's like maybe we can oust them. Maybe we can last inside the city long enough that they'll just go away and figure that they can't conquer us. Okay, so some scholars think that that's what he's doing. He's trying to raise the morale of the city, raise the morale of the officials that are under him, etc., etc. Okay, the city had enough supplies to last for months. So the idea was maybe we can outlast the enemy, because where are they going to get their supplies from? You know, it's not like they can just camp outside the city wall and grow crops or something like that. So it's like if we can outlast them, they'll go home, we can recover and hopefully do something. Okay? But quite literally, death awaits outside the walls, but Belshazzar is deciding to throw a party. Now, I appreciate all the comments of the scholars that I've read, and I think that they are insightful in some ways. But I think the most surprising insight actually comes from a more modern perspective. Pulitzer Prize-winning author Ernest Becker, he wrote a book in 1973, The Denial of Death. Okay, in that work, Becker argues that human beings know that their entire life is on the brink of death, and it is the most difficult thing to face. Now, Becker, if I understand correctly, he was either an atheist or an agnostic. Okay, but he accepted the worldview of evolution. So, I mean, within that worldview, he accepts that, okay, if our whole thing is to evolve, but I mean, eventually at the end of that is death, and no evolution in the world can stop death. And so Becker tries to work out the implications of what that means for how we live out our lives, okay? And so he says this, he says basically, instead of facing our own mortality and possibly our own significance, especially if we accept certain premises of our origin, okay, namely evolution, okay, he says that we must come up with solutions in life to know that our lives were not in vain and that they mean something. Okay? Now consider, right, Belshazzar, he's not a king truly, right? He's just a vice regent. He's just kind of substituting in for his father, who's away for his own reasons right now. Nabonidus, he's still alive, okay? That makes sense, right? Why when Belshazzar says, I'll make you the third highest ruler in the kingdom, because he's not the first, he's the second, okay? But Belshazzar has quite literally accomplished nothing in his lifetime. Even though he's the vice regent in charge, I mean, he's a nobody. He's a nobody, and he knows it. Nebuchadnezzar was the one who took Babylon into its glory days. He's the one who conquered the nations and brought wealth untold into the city. Belshazzar what is he known for? And then with death at the gates, basically he has this option. How am I going to be known? Am I going to be known as the king who lost Babylon? Or am I going to be known as the king who threw one heck of a party and stared death in the face? There's no glory for him. And now on the brink of death, he has to face up to his own meaninglessness. Listen to Ernest Becker. He's insightful. I'll be quoting him at length in the sermon, but I think the insight that he brings is gold. Okay, Becker says this. He says, the idea of death, the fear of it, haunts the human animal. There you see, there's his perspective coming through, right? But it haunts the human animal like nothing else. It is the mainspring of human activity. Activity designed largely to avoid the fatality of death, to overcome it by denying some way that it is the final destiny for man. So Becker's kind of saying there that everything that man does, in light of the fact that we know we're going to die, man is prompted to activity from that knowledge. And man does things to find significance in the light of death. In more primitive ages, people believed that death was not the end of our existence, but the beginning of the new one, right? I mean, those are very, we would say those are traditional religious beliefs, okay? You even see that in Lord of the Rings, right? At least in the movie, right? Who is it? Is it Pippin? He's in the city. And the orcs are knocking at the gate, and he's like, "Oh man, we're gonna die, Gandalf," and that's gonna be it. And he's like, "No, that's not it." After that, there's white shores and all types of stuff, and he makes death just sound like a step into some other place. But now in an age of science, we're basically told that there is no empirical data that exists for life beyond the grave. New atheist philosopher Christopher Hitchens, he's quoted as saying this. He says, "That which is asserted without evidence can be dismissed without evidence." And so Hitchens applies that to things like heaven, that if I don't see it, if there's no evidence for it, therefore I can dismiss it without evidence. He applies that to God too. Richard Dawkins, he said this. He said, "Religion teaches the dangerous nonsense that death is not the end." The philosophy of naturalistic humanism, it teaches that death is truly the end, that's it. It may be not as bleak. They at least assert that maybe our memories may live on, or that we may at least be part of the circle of life, and that we may basically become compost to feed the grass and the flowers that the animals eat, that humans eat, and so there's the circle of life, right? Existential philosophers have noted that if the beginning of life is meaningless, and the end is meaningless, then one should have the courage to say that the middle is ultimately meaningless as well. But, despite philosophy, right, and despite the people who really buy into their philosophical beliefs, we don't want to live that way. We can't. We won't. We refuse to. And Becker, that's basically what Becker's saying, is that we fight against that urge to live with meaninglessness, to live without purposelessness. Becker's basically saying that life must have meaning. It has to have meaning. Now, Becker's not going to say that somebody or something gives us meaning. Becker's point is that we try to give ourselves meaning with something. And so here, Belshazzar, this is the insight that I think Becker brings, is that Belshazzar can't face death, even as a religious person, because he is a religious person. Okay? But even as a religious person, he cannot face a death without meaning. So this party is one of the solutions to give him meaning. Okay? There's several solutions that Becker offers, and I think Belshazzar has kind of a blend of each of these. One of the ones that he offers is he calls the creative solution. Okay? The creative solution. Becker typically assigns this to artists of various kinds, but Belshazzar can fit the mold here, I think. Becker says this. He says, "The key to the creative type is that he or she is separated out of the common pool of shared meaning." In a sense, if you know artists, whether they're musicians, painters, or poets, or anything like that, you know that artists are a bit different. They have a very unique, different perspective that they bring to life, that they look at the world through. And we can definitely appreciate that, because there's some things that we may not be able to to grasp by people simply telling us, but sometimes a painting can really help us grasp a very powerful image and impress us so much that it shapes us, that it can mold us. It can leave us that way. A good song can be very impressionable too. A good poem, right? Good poetry, a good story can shape us that way. So artists, that's what they bring to the table. The key to the creative type is that he is separated out of the common pool of shared meaning. By this he means that nobody understands the artist, and this is typically true because artists tend to look at the world differently. Becker continues, he says, "There is something in his or her life experience that makes him take in the world as a problem. As a result, he has to make personal sense out of it." And so in one sense, the medium of music, art, painting, poetry, all that kind of stuff, is a way of making sense of a chaotic-looking world. This is doing something different to break the status quo, to bring meaning and significance to one's self also. Art and artistic expression are what makes sense of the world, and producing art to make sense of it, again, be it through music or on the canvas or poetry, are all ways to make life mean something. All right? And this party for Belshazzar, it's a creative expression of his own creativity to give him meaning. He's throwing a party like no party has ever been thrown before. Okay? Again, the people that are there, all the governors, the rulers, and say, okay, those are pretty normal. And all of a sudden his wives and concubines like, okay, this party just livened up. it's not a normal party. Usually the men partied with the men, and the women partied with the women, and Belshazzar's doing something a bit different. He's trying to get a little bit creative. So why? So he can break the mold, so that he can be remembered for something that nobody else has done, rather than be remembered as the guy who lost to the Persians. In Belshazzar's mind, he figured that he could leave his mark in the world, again, by throwing the greatest party that no one would forget. Now, another solution that Becker offers that is kind of hinted at this party too, Becker calls the romantic solution. He calls it the romantic solution. At the party with him, again, are the wives and concubines. Okay, Becker describes the romantic solution as a fixed urge of cosmic heroism onto another person in the form of a love object. Okay? The fixed urge of cosmic heroism onto another person in the form of a love object. He goes on to say, he says, the self-glorification that he or she needs in his innermost nature, he now looks for in the love partner. The love partner becomes the divine ideal within which to fulfill one's life. All spiritual and moral needs now become focused in one individual. In short, Becker says, the love object is God. Now, we might have a problem, and even as Christians, I mean, we certainly should, right? We have a problem saying that this love object is God, okay? But I think if we look in our own culture, if we look at the art in our culture too, in some ways, we can see that we do this. Okay, I'm not going to sing them, okay, and you all know that I've sung them before, right? But consider some music that we hear on the radio. Maybe this will give me away too, right? I try to be broad with my song list. All right, here we go. I'm so tired of being alone. I'm so tired of being on my own. Won't you help me, girl, just as soon as you can? Anybody recognize Al Green? Okay, Al Green, all right? But that idea of, hearing the song, you can see what Al Green's doing, right? Who's the one who needs to save him? This girl, whoever it is, right? He's asking for help from this girl. She's the one who's the cosmic hero in the song. She's the one that needs to save him. Here's another one. You are my fire, my one desire. Believe when I say I want it that way. The Backstreet Boys, okay? Again, you are my fire, my one desire. In the song, what's being expressed is a complete desire for this one person, this one thing that's going to fulfill all the longing in this person's life. Here's another one. Baby, you're all that I want when you're lying here in my arms. I'm finding it hard to believe we're in heaven. Hear the divine language being offered here, right? And love is all that I need, and I found it there in your heart. It isn't too hard to see we're in heaven. Yeah, that one's pretty obvious. Here's another one, and everybody's going to hate me for this one, right? If you got a Cadillac boy and a 40-room shack boy, a bucket full of money and a tree full of honey, but if you get no hugging, no smooching or a mugging, if you ain't loving, then you ain't living. And yeah, I just had to hit on George Strait there. Okay, but what is George Strait saying? I mean, in the song, and it's kind of cute, it's catchy and everything. But what's it saying? But that if you're not experiencing a romantic relationship, if you're not experiencing love from somewhere, then you're not really alive. You're not really living life. Now, you compound all these popular songs with movies and how obsessed our culture is with sex and romance, and we see that our culture certainly assigns value and worth to those who find sexual or romantic expressions, right? I mean, in all honesty, the culture makes it hard to be single and not in a relationship. So not just single in the sense of not married, but single and not in a relationship. From straight to gay, our culture says that you need to find the right partner that makes you feel alive. And the problem of the right partner also makes marriage tough in our culture as well. Idealized and romanticized views of marriage, they quickly give way to the reality of the hard work of what a relationship is. And so as a result, our culture has accepted divorce as just a normal part of the process of finding love. And pornography is another problem. Pornography is another aspect of this romantic solution to find meaning. Becker says this. He says, sex is a disappointing answer to life's riddle. And if we pretend that it is an adequate one, we are lying to both ourselves and to our children. Pretty insightful for an agnostic guy, right? But I mean, he's really hitting on some tones, though. He's really seeing what God has already said, that if you look for meaning and purpose in anything outside of God, he won't say God, but if you look for anything that you try to build your life on that isn't God, is ultimately futile. It's ultimately meaningless. And I mean, Becker's book, at least I read it a couple of years ago, it doesn't end on a positive note. Becker's book is just observations of what we do. He doesn't offer hope. He doesn't offer another solution. He's just observing what it is that we do, at least just to make us aware of it. I believe he was a psychiatrist, I believe. But, I mean, there's no hope in Becker's book. He's just basically saying, I mean, it's meaningless. Try to find your own meaning, but, I mean, it's ultimately futile. That's all Becker can do. Ultimately, the romantic solution fails us. It fails us for meaning, and I think Belshazzar is going to find that it's going to fail him too. Listen to Becker again. If the partner becomes God, he or she can just as easily become the devil. Anybody who's been in relationships for long enough, sometimes, at least young relationships, I think, not so much your, older, mature relationships, but we know this to be true. And he says this, the reason is not far to seek. For one thing, one becomes bound to the object in dependency. And this is regardless of gender. I mean, it happens to men as much as it happens to women too, right? One needs it for self-justification. One can be utterly dependent whether one needs the object as a source of strength in a masochistic way or whether one needs it to feel one's own self-expansive strength by manipulating it sadistically. That seems to be more the male tendency, right? To control, to oppress in that sort of way. But that's how, in one sense, that's at least the tendency. And I'll just, be stereotyping a bit there. In either case, Becker says, one's self-development is restricted by the object, absorbed by it. If you find the ideal love and try to make it the sole judge of good and bad in yourself, the measure of your strivings, you become simply the reflex of another person. In other words, Becker's saying, your life becomes dependent on your relationship to that person. If they're happy, you're happy. When they're sad, you're sad. When they're angry, you're sad. You become dependent. You become addicted on that person. I like the way he says that your life simply becomes the reflex of another person. When you confuse personal love and cosmic heroism, you are bound to fail in both spheres. One of the ways that I think our culture kind of gets this across too, when it comes to identity and self-worth, I'm hoping everybody here has seen it or already heard of it, but the children's movie Frozen, right? Everybody's heard of the character Elsa and Anna. They're all over the place. They're outselling Barbie already, okay? Barbie's completely jealous, and probably again this Christmas they'll be outselling Barbie again, right? But her Elsa's song, Let It Go, that resonates so well with what the culture, with what the culture says. Let it go, don't hold it back anymore, don't be the good girl everybody wants you to be, you got to let it all go, right? But the song resonates so much with our culture because it expresses the belief that significance is found in self-assertion and self-discovery. Popular novels also, like Eat, Pray, Love, they express the same attitude, right? Find your own happiness. It doesn't matter if you leave a pile of trash behind you, right? If you leave a large wake and you destroy other people's lives, don't worry about that. As long as you find what fulfills you, that's what you need to do. Be what you want. You have to make your own meaning in life. You have to let it go. Don't hold back who you are. And this is why our culture celebrates coming out, right? That's why our culture celebrates that, because in a sense our culture is celebrating the courage to come out and be whatever it is that you want to be, letting it all go. And I mean, our culture celebrated this, about 2 months ago maybe, or a month and a half, something like that, at the ESPY Awards, right? Bruce Jenner, not Caitlyn, right? Bruce Jenner is celebrated as the most courageous person of that year for coming out. That's where our culture's headed. That's the kind of, that's the kind of identity, the kind of acts that are praised. This cultural value is an expressive individualism. That's what we could call it. Expressive individualism, where life is defined by being who and what you want to be. Forget what anybody else says. Don't let anybody influence you. Be whatever you want to be. And Elsa had to learn, if you've seen the movie, right? Elsa had to learn that her expressive individualism left everyone else out in the cold. Literally. Okay? Literally. Now, you might be thinking, right, that I'm going to say that religion is the key, right? I mean, we're in a church place here, right? We're Christians, and naturally, this is where the preacher should just come out and say, that's why you need religion, right? Becker also identifies a religious solution, okay? But we have to remember, right? And the thing too in this story, Belshazzar, he's not a secular man; he's a religious person. So he's combining this solution too. He's toasting his own gods. He's toasting his gods. I mean, he's not secular. He's thoroughly religious. He's toasting the gods of gold and silver, bronze, iron, wood, and stone. Belshazzar, he's hosting this feast partly as a religious feast. But look at what he is doing with his religion. He's using it to look down on others. He's using it to look down on others. In particular, he's looking down upon the God of Israel as he's symbolically holding him in his hands, as he's holding out the cup. In Belshazzar's mind, he's thinking, this is what I think of the God of Israel. I hold the God of Israel in my hands. Nobody's going to tell me what to do or how to live my life or whose kingdom is going to topple who. God of Israel, I've got him by the throat. That's what he's doing symbolically and holding up those cups. So let me be very clear here. Religion that is not rooted in the grace of God is doomed to being rooted in how hard and how fervently you serve your God or gods. Okay? Religion that is not rooted in the grace of God. In other words, a religion that doesn't freely give you an identity. You're going to have to earn your identity through that religion. And that usually comes out in how hard and how fervent, how faithful you can be in it. Maybe the crazy things that you'll do in the name of your religion even. Belshazzar, he has to look down upon everyone from the vantage point of his own gods. And we might know Christians like this, right? People who use Christianity to boost themselves, and they use their Christianity to look down upon other Christians or to look down upon other people who are made in the image of God. We know people, in history we've seen people have used their Christianity to look down upon other races even. It can happen. People can use religion the wrong way, even Christianity. And this is not, this is a problem that can be systemic in any religion. Some religions we can identify it easier than others. Like it's easy to look at Islam, right? Theirs is very clear. Submit to us, and that's it. It's pretty clear. But even in Christian cults, like in Mormonism, if you didn't live up to the standards, they had ways of basically, no, we need to get you in line. We love our Mormonism so much that if one person leaves our fold, we have this practice. I don't know that they still practice it today, but it was in the history of the Mormon Church, what they would call blood atonement. And they'd have to kill the person if they left Mormonism. This is why it was difficult to convert out of Mormonism publicly early on, because basically they would say the only way to redeem this person is we have to kill them, and we have to take their blood. We have to make atonement for them, and that's a way of showing, in a sense, how hard or how fervent you have to practice a religion to keep your identity. Now, by now you might be thinking, right? Geez, sorry I asked about the party. That's a lot that's going on there. But consider that we're all throwing our parties, first of all, right? Consider that we're all throwing our parties, that we're all searching for significance in the face of death. We are all lifting the treasures of God and using them to toast our own gods. We're all throwing a party in the light of the coming judgment of God. Listen to the words of Romans chapter 1 and see if they describe Belshazzar's life and even ours in some respect. It says, for the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men, who by their unrighteousness suppress the truth. For what can be known about God is plain to them, because God has shown it to them. For his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world and the things that have been made, so they are without excuse. Listen to God, in one sense, speaking to Belshazzar here. Belshazzar knows this. For although they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give him thanks, but they became futile in their thinking, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Claiming to be wise, they became fools, and exchanged the glory of God, or the glory of the immortal God, for images resembling mortal man and birds and animals and creeping things. And that's the foolishness of the party. Thinking that you can take control of your own life, thinking that you can bring a meaning to your own life by creating your own God, by creating your own meaning, and even by being your own God. So, no sooner than Belshazzar had lifted up his cup to toast the gods, so imagine the scene, right? Okay, now that we've got all the background and we kind of understand a little bit of what's going on in Belshazzar's head and what's this party for, Belshazzar lifts his cup up. He's got to be in front of everybody. He's probably sitting down, or he's standing up at the head of the table, or at least in front of his throne maybe. And he picks up his cup and he's about to toast his gods. And suddenly, a human hand, apparently probably from here up or something this way, appears on the wall, and it just starts writing on the wall. I don't know the size of it. I don't know if it was like this overgrown hand or what, or if it was just pretty normal, but just there in the background, imagine. It just starts writing. I don't know if he hears it. We don't know exactly what gets his attention. Maybe it's in front of him even, but he sees it now. He sees it, and it causes him to lose his stance, okay? It says that his, literally it says something like that, he became in knots, okay, is what it should literally be translated into. Some commentators even believe that he soiled himself out of fear, that he was that afraid. You know, maybe he knew exactly what was going on when maybe he made the connection, like, I'm toasting against the God of Israel. Uh-oh, there's a hand on the wall, like, uh-oh, I've done it now, okay? Now, the reader knows that this writing is from God, and that the hand is a representation of the presence of God. I'm sure Belshazzar had cursed various gods many times, but he never expected for any one of them to show up. Belshazzar certainly did not expect God's presence at the party, so God is our first uninvited guest. He shows up uninvited, right? I mean, who would have thought? Okay, who would have thought? I mean, we live our lives, you know, in our past, you know, we're all Christian, all right? But we've taunted God in our own ways, and people still live their lives today taunting God, and they never expect Him to show up. I mean, for the most part, our experience isn't, you know, that we see somebody curse God, and bam, God shows up right away and judges them. You know, that's not our experience. You know, God does that in time, right? I mean, eventually God shows up, and you know, He comes calling. You know, people see their own handwriting on the wall. We have that cultural phrase now, right? You know, the phrase means that you see an imminent sign of danger. Basically, it's time to abandon ship. Okay. Now, for Belshazzar, his judgment is nearing, and not really sure what to do. The king calls in the wise men, you know, to interpret the writing. But they prove to be as incompetent as ever. I mean, we just see that throughout the book of Daniel. The wise men of Babylon are just, they can't get it done, ever. And so finally the queen, this is probably the queen mother, not his queen, okay, because remember, he's not the actual king, okay? So the queen mother, she appeals to the king, and she says that he should call in the most unlikely guest, Daniel, our second uninvited guest, okay? Now, Daniel is old by this point. Okay, he's probably in his 80s, maybe even up to 90. Okay, Daniel is well aged by this time. Okay, now why is Daniel not there? Well, the guy's an old man. You know, I mean, he's probably at home sleeping. But the other thing too, you know, at least what we get from this tale, is that Daniel doesn't seem to have been doing much work with King Belshazzar. It seems like Belshazzar just dismissed Daniel. You know, period. Maybe, you know, I don't know. Maybe he didn't like some of the things that Daniel had to say about the upcoming future of Babylon. Okay, you know, Daniel's prophecy certainly would have still been in the mind of, at least of Nebuchadnezzar's ancestors. Like, hey, eventually Babylon's going to end, and these other kingdoms are going to take over. No king wants to hear that, right? They want to hear that their kingdom is going to be enduring forever and ever. That's what they would like to hear. But anyway, she's quick to tell him. She says, your father, okay, here by here she means basically your ancestor, okay, she doesn't mean like his literal dad, but your father had made him chief of the magicians, and she says for good reasons, right? Because he was smart, because it seemed like the spirit of the gods were in him. He had wisdom, he had intelligence, and he knew how to interpret dreams. So she's making the case like, hey, call Daniel. Daniel will get it done. Daniel's the one who can do it. She says, quite literally, she says that Daniel can solve problems. And the word that's used there in the text literally says Daniel is a person who can untie knots. Many of you all get knots on your shoes every now and then. I have one right now on my shoe, but I work with children, and so every now and then I get these little pre-K and kinder kids who come to me that they need to get their shoes tied, and they show me their shoe, and there's a big old knot. I'm like, have a seat, son. This is gonna take a while, and you spend about 5 minutes just trying to get the knot done, so then you can solve the problem. But Belshazzar, he finds his life in a knot, and Daniel is a person who knows how to untie knots, apparently. So, enter Daniel. Okay, our second uninvited guest. Daniel is only summoned because of Belshazzar's personal crisis. Okay, he was not amongst the guest list during the feasting and the revelry. And Daniel is not treated kindly by Belshazzar at all. Okay, I think Belshazzar, in his pride, he's still looking down upon the God of Israel, whom he had just insulted and ruined his party, right? This was supposed to be Belshazzar's fame, and God just shows up and shuts the party down. And so when we hear the words, and this is why I read them this way, but I think there's a snarkiness to Belshazzar when Daniel comes in, and he sounds like, so you are that Daniel. You're one of the exiles of Judah, whom the king my father brought from Judah. I've heard that the spirit of the gods is in you. So he doesn't believe it. I think he's kind of being sarcastic about this whole thing. And he's like, my guys came in here and couldn't tell me what it means. So if you want to go ahead and give it your best shot, go ahead. You can do it, and if you do, there's something for it. Something in it for you. But Belshazzar doesn't seem to be expecting much from Daniel at all. Now, Daniel's character, right? Because we're introduced to rough Daniel in this one, okay? Daniel's character has been very cordial toward Nebuchadnezzar, right? Very, in a sense, very concerned, compassionate toward Nebuchadnezzar. But Daniel's about to express no love for this king, Belshazzar, okay? Seeing through Belshazzar, through his ridicule and sarcasm, and Daniel as an older man, he's probably like, I don't need this from you. He's a little kid, whatever, he kind of looks at him that way, and he tells the king, you can keep all your stuff. I don't want it. Perhaps he wants the king to know that his services on God's behalf cannot be bought. Maybe Belshazzar's motive in saying, I'll give you all this sort of stuff, I'll give you, a purple robe and gold chain and third highest ruler. Maybe he was trying to bribe Daniel into saying, like, say something favorable about me. My guests are watching, be cool about it with me, okay? And Daniel wants him to know, no, you can't buy the God of Israel. You can't buy the word of the Lord. So before giving the interpretation, Daniel, he has a stinging rebuke for Belshazzar. We can look at that on verses 18 through 23. He says this, O king, the Most High God gave Nebuchadnezzar, your father, kingship and greatness and glory and majesty. And because of the greatness that he gave him, all peoples, nations, and languages trembled and feared before him. Whom he would, he killed, and whom he would, he kept alive. Whom he would, he raised up, and whom he would, he humbled. But when his heart was lifted up, and his spirit was hardened, so that he dealt proudly, he was brought down from his kingly throne, and his glory was taken from him. He was driven from among the children of mankind, and his mind was made like that of a beast, and his dwelling was with the wild donkeys. And he was fed grass like an ox, and his body was wet with the dew of heaven, until he knew that the Most High God rules the kingdom of mankind, and sets over it whom he will. There's that repeated theme that Daniel wants every person of every nation to know, especially the rulers, right? And then he says, and you, his son, Belshazzar, have not humbled your heart. The implication is that Nebuchadnezzar humbled his heart. He was humbled by God, but Belshazzar, on the other hand, he hasn't been humbled. And he says, though you knew all this, but you have lifted up yourself against the Lord of heaven. And the vessels of his house have been brought in before you, and you and your lords and your wives and your concubines have drunk wine from them. And you have praised the gods of silver and gold, of bronze, iron, wood, and stone, which do not see or hear or know, but the God in whose hand is your breath. So look at the imagery flip, right, that Daniel's doing here. I mean, if you see kind of the literary thing, Belshazzar thinks that he has the God of Israel in his hand, and Daniel lets him know it's your life that is actually in his hand. And whose are all your ways you have not honored. That is a pretty stinging and scathing rebuke. Probably not the best way to come before the king, but what the heck? Daniel's old, right? I mean, he doesn't have to impress this guy. Okay? Funny, right? We know how some older people can be, right? I mean, they've lived life. They can earn the rebukes that they give to a younger generation behind them. Okay, but of all people who should have known the history of his own family, right? Belshazzar should have known that pride is the end of a person before God. Moreover, he should have known that God is sovereign and that all that Belshazzar has, he has because it was given to him. It was not earned. He should have known that God rules, but instead Daniel points out to Belshazzar that he has not humbled himself. He has sinned with the high hand, knowing all these things. He has knowingly taken the things of God and served his own gods with them. He has spit at God. He has spit at God in the face. The old Puritans are some of the best to read. If you ever want to know what sin is, okay, but if you ever want a scathing rebuke too, you read the old Puritans. Years ago, and I'll tell you, I didn't finish reading the book because it brings that much guilt on you, right? There's a Puritan by the name of Ralph Venning. Okay, I believe his book is called The Sinfulness of Sin. Okay, the sinfulness of sin. But he describes sin this way. He said, sin is the dare of God's justice, the rape of his mercy, the jeer of his patience, the slight of his power, and the contempt of his love. Notice that Ralph Venning and Daniel, they describe sin not merely as a list of, not merely as a breaking a list of do's and don'ts, but as a mocking of the goodness of God. Daniel holds Belshazzar accountable for knowledge of God and his goodness despite not having any formal association with the Jewish religion. In other words, Belshazzar didn't need to know the Ten Commandments or all the other civil codes or the sacrificial laws. He didn't need to know those things and be aware of them to sin against God. He should have just realized God has given me these things. And when I do what I want with them, and when I push God out of my mind, when the way I live and run my life, I'm sinning against the goodness of God. Everybody knows God, and everybody knows that we should thank him, as we saw in Romans 1. I mean, our stance before God in everything in life is one of humble dependence. Belshazzar's quest for his own identity is a rejection of the one that God has designed for him. Daniel goes on to read the writing and to interpret the meaning, right? So let's get to the good stuff, okay, I guess, right? But the writing itself, it's possible that it was all consonants that were written, that were on the wall, and so the missing vowels is what it could have made reading the writing so difficult. Okay, there's some words like if I put PCK, if I put PCK up on the wall, like, well, do I mean pack? Do I mean pick? Do I mean puck? It's like, well, what does he mean? We see some writing, but if it's missing vowels, right, we can stick in other vowels, and we could get totally different meanings with different vowels. Okay. Now Daniel reads aloud the writing. Okay, mene, tekel, parsin. Okay. Now the words are word plays on various form of weights for currency in the marketplace. Okay, they're word plays, all right? They're in order from the heaviest mentioned weight, a mina. Okay, so mina, mene, okay, there, right? We see it, okay? But a mina, all the way to the lighter shekel, okay, to the lightest, a half or a divided shekel. Okay, now these are nouns, okay, but Daniel puts the words in a verb form to mean basically this: numbered, weighed, divided. Okay? The words by themselves, I mean, they are indeed cryptic, right? I mean, they're kind of like, okay, numbered, weighed, divided. You got me still, right? They still don't have any meaning to them, okay? Now, supposing that the enchanters and the magicians could read the words, knowing their meaning, again, that would have been quite the task. Like, well, what has been numbered, right? Why has it been numbered? What or who has been weighed? Why did it need to be weighed? Where was it divided? How was it divided? When was it divided? What has been divided? So the words themselves, even if they could read them, they still wouldn't have provided what the king wants to know. They would have created more questions than the answer. Now, the Spirit of God speaking through Daniel, it supplies the interpretation of the writing. And it says this is the interpretation of the matter. Mene, God has numbered the days of your kingdom and brought it to an end. And it's just said twice, right? Mene, mene, for emphasis. Tekel, you have been weighed in the balances and found wanting. And Perez, or Parson, right? Your kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and Persians. You can even kind of detect a wordplay, right, with Paris or Parson. Persians. They're meant to sound the same, right? So there's some interesting things going on there from a literary perspective. Now, Belshazzar, his name, I haven't given you what his name means. His name means God protect the king. Okay? That's what his name means. And Belshazzar, here he's fully exposed and helpless before the God of Israel. In a sense, none of his gods can come to his aid because they're made of gold, they're made of silver, they're made of bronze, of stone, of iron. They're not alive, they're inanimate. There's an irony of his name, right? Belshazzar, God protect the king. And none of his gods come to his aid. None of his gods come to protect him. Belshazzar's party is exposed as an ultimate act of folly, for there is no protection for him from God's judgment or even from his own death. Belshazzar, he hears the news, right? He hears the words, and we're not sure how he reacted. We don't know if he dropped in his chair and kind of gave up, if he wanted to toast. We don't know what he did. If he laughed it off, his reaction isn't given. We're also not sure why Daniel ended up receiving the gift, right? Because Daniel said, "I don't want your gifts. I don't need your stuff." But yet, the text says Daniel was clothed. He was clothed in purple, and he was given, the chain, and he was made the third highest ruler of the kingdom. Whatever. The Persians are like a couple of hours away from taking over the city, right? That's what's going on here. The Bible goes on to say, it ends the story, that on that very night, Belshazzar, he was killed, and Darius the Mede, one of Cyrus's generals, he received the kingdom. The interesting way that the Persians took the city, the walls of Babylon really were impenetrable. Okay, they really were impregnable. I mean, there was no war machine at that time. There was no technology that could have helped them to breach that wall. So you know what they did? The river that runs through the city, they diverted part of the river into a canal. That way they could lower the waters that come into the city. They lowered them just enough, I believe, to about mid-thigh, waist high, so that their troops could basically go underneath the wall and go into the city. Babylon went out without a fight that night. There were nobody. I mean, where was everybody? Everybody's at the party. Everybody was at the party. Persians just walked in, slayed Belshazzar right there, and the Persians took over. It's kind of interesting though, because you think when they get there, Belshazzar's probably not looking like a king at this point. Who's looking like the king? Daniel, the one wearing purple now. The one, who's just been made third highest ruler in the kingdom. It's kind of interesting because then this will set up, Daniel, in Daniel chapter 6, he'll enter the scene under the rule of the Medo-Persian Empire, and he's going to have a high place and position. So maybe that kind of answers how he got there a bit. Either way, God's people reading this would immediately find comfort in knowing that God is sovereign over rulers and nations. And God's people were to find comfort in a God who rules and disposes those who do not submit to his rule. In other words, God is still ruling the hostile world that God's people are in. So, what does this mean for us today? All over the world today, there is feasting and there is mocking against the holy God of Israel. All across the world, there are those who mock God, not by holding up cups, but by holding up the heads of dead Christians. They toast their God with the heads of those who are holy in Christ. There are those who toast the gods of autonomy and self-worth by holding up legislation that is meant to suppress the voice of God's people who speak his word. There is rejoicing and celebration when God's people are suppressed at the workplace, in politics, in school, in work, and in some places, even in churches, where Christian ministers cannot read from certain portions of Scripture without being charged with hate crimes, hate speech. The world is always inviting people into its own party, into its own feast, and toasting its own gods. Belshazzar's story, it teaches us not to be awed and impressed by the earthly power and wealth. And since just like Daniel, he wasn't impressed when he got to the party and he showed up, and that's why he spoke so sternly to the king. He wasn't impressed by it. It teaches us not to envy those in high places or whom society and culture hold in high regards. We must be on guard from envy and jealousy. We must not believe that we will find contentment and true happiness in the things that this life offers. We must not believe that we can use the things of God while trying to suppress the truth of His existence and His judgment. We must not miss the writing on the wall that when we lift up our cups and toast the things that we worship, we must not miss the writing on the wall that God will bring His judgment. Eventually, the New Testament will liken the whole world to one big giant Babylon. In the book of Revelation, the idolatrous seductions of the world are summed up in this woman, the great prostitute in Revelation 17. She's called Mystery Babylon, and in Revelation 17:4, she is described as being adorned in purple and scarlet, wearing gold and jewels. But most significant is what she's holding in her hand. She's holding a golden cup full of abominations and impurities of her sexual immorality, and she's drunk on the blood of the saints. That is to say, she enjoys toasting to the death of God's people. She enjoys watching them suffer at her hands. She enjoys watching them suffer through the pleasures that she offers. She enjoys watching God's people be destroyed. She enjoys watching Christians in a hostile world. Centuries later, from this story, there was another king at the gates, but this time it was God who came in humility in the form of a servant. Jesus Christ, God in the flesh, He came uninvited to the kingdom of darkness, and He was offered cups of power, right, the temptation of Satan. He was offered cups of power, of prestige, and wealth from Satan himself, but He refused them all. Instead, Jesus Christ took the cup that nobody wanted, but that was going to come around eventually to everyone. That is the cup of God's wrath. The Bible does speak of God's wrath as a cup. In Psalm 75:8, it says, "For in the hand of the Lord there is a cup with foaming wine, well mixed, and He pours out from it, and all the wicked of the earth shall drain it down to the dregs." In the Garden of Gethsemane, Jesus prayed. He said, "Let this cup pass from me." And why? Was Jesus wicked? No. The answer is that Jesus Christ was counted as wicked. He was counted as a sinner in the place of sinners. 2 Corinthians 5:21 says that Jesus was made sin, not because he sinned himself, but for our sake. He was counted as a sinner for us. He was treated as if He were us, so that we would be treated as if we were Him, perfectly righteous, completely obedient, holy before the Father. On the cross, Jesus Christ was numbered among the sinners. He was the one who was weighed and found wanting on our behalf. On the cross, Jesus Christ was handed over to the wrath of God so that we could get the ultimate party and inherit the ultimate feast that can truly stare death in the face and literally say to death, "I beat you." Because of the resurrection, all who believe in Christ and obey Him can confidently say that death has no victory. It's only the resurrection that proves Ernest Becker wrong. That there really is meaning, that we don't have to search out our own meaning. That Christ gives us meaning. Jesus, the true and better King of a true and better party, He lifts up His cup of victory in celebration of true life. The prophet Isaiah, he saw this feast in Isaiah chapter 25. If you guys get a chance, this is a really, really good text to just commit to memory and just at least know where it is. But in Isaiah chapter 25, verses 6 through 8, it says this: On this mountain the Lord of hosts will make for all peoples a feast of rich food, a feast of well-aged wine, of rich food full of marrow, of aged wine well refined. And he will swallow up on this mountain the covering that is cast over all peoples, the veil that is spread over all nations. He will swallow up death forever. And the Lord God will wipe away tears from all faces, and the reproach of his people he will take away from all the earth, for the Lord has spoken. You think about the hostile world. This is in a sense the context of the prophecy, that when God would bring his people out of Babylon, out of their exile, this was part of the promise of bringing them out, that God was going to bring us to himself. And if you think about it, living in a hostile world, trying to be faithful, there's constant accusation against Christians, that Christians are the problem. That why don't you just conform to our society? Just become a Babylonian. Everything will go well for you. It's rough living under that. And here there's the promise that the Lord God will wipe away tears from all faces, and the reproach of his people he will take away from all the earth. So the questions that we meditate on as we come to a close here is what party are you at? What cup are you lifting up? Are you lifting up God's holy things and using them to toast your own gods, looking to create your own meaning and your own place in the world? There is a time for now that God will allow people to lift up their cups against him. God will allow us to toast to the gods of pleasure and comfort and money and power and vain beauty, but the writing is already on the wall. I mean, the way that it comes out in Acts, the resurrection is the writing on the wall. The resurrection is proof that God will judge the world by Jesus Christ. That's what Paul says, and Peter says that also in Acts chapter 2. The resurrection is proof that all but Christ have been weighed and found wanting. He's the only one who has defeated death. He's the only one who can bring the true and better celebration than Belshazzar. Belshazzar, like the rest of the world, he can only toast his cups to an inevitable end. I mean, he can look at it and stare death in the face, but it's coming. I mean, period. There's no way around it. But Jesus Christ, because he drank the cup of God's wrath, he took the cup that would kill us, really and truly. He gives us a true and better feast that can truly, in him and because of him, we can truly lift up our cups against death in the security of the feast and the presence of our true and better King. Amen.